In the previous video, I discussed how trees regrow relatively fast in Vermont, with effort needed to keep areas open. However, there are still good reasons to plant trees. One of these is planting trees along the banks of rivers and streams. Trees have many benefits when along the edges of rivers and streams. One of them is that they provide shade, which keeps the river cooler. Cooler water has a higher dissolved oxygen content. Trees on the edges of rivers are also a source of large woody debris. The large woody debris in rivers can provide backwaters which have slower moving water. Slower moving water drops out sediment and provides resting spots for fish and other aquatic animals. Additionally, the logs themselves provide resting sites for birds, turtles, and aquatic mammals. Slowing the water in the channel helps reduce erosion and reconnect the floodplain, among other benefits. Tree roots grab onto soil and help stabilize the bank, reducing erosion. However, this takes many years to develop, so areas with active erosion need more intensive intervention. When sediment enters a water body, it itself can become a pollutant. Sediment can fill in around rocks which provide important habitat for many small creatures. Areas of high sediment also don't let light through, inhibiting plant growth and reducing visibility range so animals can't see their prey. Additionally, though not exclusively, sediment can clog the gills of fish, making it hard for them to survive. Sediment also has nutrients bonded to it. Excessive nutrients in water bodies can be bad for many reasons, but Western Vermont is currently experiencing a water quality crisis linked to phosphorus. The excessive phosphorus entering some lakes via rivers and streams is causing blooms of cyanobacteria, also known as blue-green algae. This bacterium, in addition to being malodorous and unsightly, can produce toxins which are dangerous to humans and pets. Though not presently a problem in those areas of Vermont, when the bacteria plume dies, it uses up dissolved oxygen to decompose. When all the dissolved oxygen is used up in an area, or just low levels exist, aquatic life cannot survive. These areas are called dead zones for that reason, and are found at the mouths of multiple major rivers with extensive upstream agriculture. One of these rivers with dead zones at its mouth is the Connecticut River, which drains eastern Vermont. This dead zone in Long Island Sound is linked to excessive nitrogen. Though the hayfield on our land likely does not produce extensive amounts of nutrient runoff, removing as much as possible helps. A buffer of trees between agriculture and waterways helps as the trees use up those nutrients as it flows across. Trees have higher rates of transpiration than grasses, which means there is more water through flow, and water contains nutrients that are flowing. Trees along the banks of rivers also produce a rougher floodplain surface than grasses. This rougher floodplain surface slows down the water in it, slowing down the flood wave. Slowing down the flood wave reduces peak flows downstream. Lowering the peak flows of flood waves is the best way to reduce damage that is done through flooding. 8 years ago, we planted 200 hardwood trees and shrubs in this area. This one behind me is the only one that has really thrived, and only a few more besides that have survived. One of the first causes of mortality, besides the expected loss due to the transplanting, was the ice flow the next spring. Current-driven large ice bands broke the supportive stakes in some areas and then bent or broke those saplings. Additionally, in some areas we planted the trees, it was just too wet for them to grow. A couple years later, the beavers found them and cut down most of the trees for food. We did manage to get chicken wire up around a couple trees that the beavers had not cut yet, but even this is not foolproof. Just this spring, 2 of the trees that had survived until now, though not without hardship, were cut down by beavers. The wire we had put up around them had slumped down enough that the beavers were able to get at them. Even though we have this one tree growing well, and many more resprouting from the stumps, we don't really expect this tree to survive long, as emerald ash borer in this area is imminent, and this, as a white ash, has about a 1% chance of survival once that hits. Though nowhere near a statistically significant sample, of the handful of spruces we dug up from our land and planted at the same time, one is surviving. This gives a much better survival rate than the other trees. Springtime is the best time to plant trees in Vermont. This is the time of the year when there's the most abundant water, and the trees have a whole summer of growing season before they have to survive their first winter. Though the first batch of trees we planted was almost a complete failure, we want to try again. This planting will be at a smaller scale. The last one was done with bought trees and the help of local middle and high school students to do the actual physical task of planting. To have better chances of survival with this batch, we're making some changes. With a smaller number of trees, we'll also be able to provide more water to them throughout the summer. The last batch we were only able to consistently provide water to a couple trees and intermittently provide water to a good number more, but even we weren't able to provide water at all to some of the trees just because it took too long to water 200 trees, and that wasn't our full-time job over the summer. I also planted these trees in areas that we haven't observed as much ice flow. These areas are also some of the drier areas, so it has a double benefit. I'll also plan on installing some substantial posts upstream of the trees but very close by to try to prevent the ice from knocking them over. These posts I'll hope are large enough to prevent the ice from breaking them when it comes through. The trees, with the exception of the few spruces that we planted 8 years ago, were almost entirely hardwoods. Beavers eat almost exclusively hardwoods, and so they found this a nice salad bar of young, tender saplings. There are plenty of alder on the far side of the river, though the beavers don't seem to be that interested in it, but they'll definitely eat that over softwoods. One of the best trees for wet areas is northern white cedar. However, cedar is a favorite winter food of deer, and deer will just decimate small exposed cedars. This knocks cedars out of contention as an option for planting trees in this area. I planted 5 balsam fir and 1 spruce that I dug up from our land. It would be possible to plant other species as well, it's just these are the ones that I happen to find easy to dig up or needed to be dug up. I'll try to find time this summer, hopefully on a weekly basis, to come down and water these newly planted trees. This will hopefully improve their chances of surviving this first summer, which may well be quite dry. So this is about an appropriate sized hole for the root mass that I brought over here, and then I'm just going to cover it up. And when you're transplanting trees, you want to cover a little bit above the old dirt line before the transplant. And I'm just putting the grass in upside down so this tree doesn't have as much competition. Even though it's decently sized, the grass will probably be growing this tall this summer, so it's good to try to give it the least amount of competition, and also for nutrients and water. And even though this is a fairly wet area in this riverbank silt, I still want to make this a little bit lower in the ground so that water would naturally pool there as opposed to flowing away compared to like just the surrounding ground. Putting a little bit more in to keep it above. And then use the water to compact the soil and like make it coalesce. You don't want to do a ton of packing down with your hands because that can compact it too much, but just pouring lots of water in will both hydrate this tree as well as get the soil, remove any large air voids in it to help with that. And I'll put in a couple of these 5-gallon buckets today, and then over the next week I'll make sure to bring more down here or take them from the river, come down daily, and then after that once or twice a week throughout the summer to try to keep this tree and more that I plant hydrated through the summer so they survive the first summer. Though the past tree planting was not very successful, we have hope these newly planted trees will grow well and provide many benefits to the river and downstream environment.